So, good afternoon, everyone. Today we will be going to discuss your very first module in environment technologies. Let's talk about the introduction of ICT. Okay, kasi as I have mentioned previously, this subject will focus more on the term ICT and its related terminologies. So, here are the following course objectives na meron tayo ngayon. So, first of all, we will be defining the ICT related terminologies. We will also be providing different examples and different uses of ICT. Also, we will try to recall the state and impacts of ICT in the Philippines. Kamusta na nga ba ang ICT dito sa Pilipinas? What can we say? Diba? What can you say about the ICT here in the Philippines? And also, the last topic that we have here is how are you going to apply the email etiquettes? This is very important. I would like to emphasize this discussion later on kasi not only in my subject but rather in other subjects, I want you guys to at least have an idea or be familiar on how to properly send a message to your teachers or, emails sa mga teachers ninyo. Okay. So, let's go ahead and zoom ko to para makita natin ng todo. Ayan. So let's go ahead and introduce what is ICT. Now, the word ICT, before we can even define the word ICT as a whole, let's try to define them word per word. So ICT stands for Information and Communications Technology. I repeat, ICT stands for Information and Communications Technology. Hindi po Informations, Communication Technology, hindi po. But rather, it's Information and Communications Technology. Now, the definition of information, as we all know, based from your English subject or other subjects out there, it refers to the knowledge obtained from reading, investigation, study, or research. So basically, lahat ng nababasa nyo or lahat na nakukuha nyo are considered as information. And meanwhile, the definition of communication, the simplest definition of this one is the way on how we transmit messages and process them, where those information is exchanged between individual. So for example, yan, nag-uusap tayo ngayon. We are trying to communicate, I'm trying to communicate these certain topics to all of you. And this is a way on how we communicate as well. Yan. So kapag ka nakikipag-usap kayo through chat, that's another form of communication. Diba? Now, technology, on the other hand, is simply application of science used to solve problems. Now, let's try to understand deeply the application of science used to solve problems. Maybe some of you are thinking, Sir, ibig sabihin ba, for as long as it can solve any particular problems, it is considered as technology. Well, yes. Well, in fact, before pa itong nakikita natin ng mga computers, laptops, personal phones, and everything, di ba? We have the very first technology na meron tayo noon pa. Ano yun? Fire. Okay? Fire is considered as the first ever technology created. Because, the problem before was humans are having some difficulties navigating of course, their environment. So, they have to create something para makita nila yung dinadaanan nila. And, because of that, they were able to invent the very, very first technology, which is fire. Diba? Alam natin kung paano nag-umpisa ang fire? Diba? Using yung dalawang kahoy, tapos yung bato. Yan. Tapos inikot-ikot lang nila. So, that alone is what we call the technology. So, wag tayong mag-focus lang sa definition ng technology na nakikita natin ngayon like gadgets and everything. Okay? So, let's now define ICT as a whole. Based from the definition of information and communications technology, it's actually safe to assume that ICT are simply different tools and devices that are used to gather, again, create, edit, and store information that are communicated, take note, diba? Or exchanged by others by means of electronics. Kung napapansin nyo, napakadaling i-define ng ICT, di ba? So, titignan mo muna ano nga ba yung gusto mong iparating na information. Yan. So, you will try to communicate that information using a certain technology. And aside from that, ICT is used to convert, store, protect, process, transmit, and retrieve information from anywhere, anytime. Yan, di ba? So, napakadaling intindihin ng ICT. Well, I am assuming na kapag pinadefine ko ang ICT sa inyo without looking or without even memorizing this one, you can easily define them. Now, let's try to take a look at the two different definitions of ICT based from the official IBM glossary and UK National Curriculum Development, document in the year 2000. Well, according to IBM, 'di ba? Kung titingnan niyo maigi, ang definition ng IBM, alam naman natin ng IBM. I don't know if you're aware, but IBM is actually bought by Lenovo ngayon. So dating IBM 'yan. Yung mga Lenovo ngayon, dati silang IBM. 'Di ba? So International Business Machine ang ibig sabihin po ng IBM. And ICT is the use of computer-based information systems and communication systems to process, transmit, and store data and information. Di ba halos synonymous siya dito sa una? Magkakaiba lang yung way kung paano nila i-define, but then it's still synonymous. The idea is always there. The UK National Curriculum Document, yan, pinaka-simple yung definition nila ng ICT. Basically, ICT as the technology is the technology used to handle information and aid communication. So that's it. So those are the simplest definition of ICT. I hope meron na kayong idea sa definition natin ng ICT because our entire topic in empowerment technologies will focus more on the use of ICT. How are we going to empower technologies in many different ways? Okay? Now, let's try to take a look at the different examples and uses of ICT. Focus muna tayo dito sa information. Diba? Kung napansin nyo, nowadays, information, napakadali pong kumuha ng information. We have the power to, manipulate information, and at the same time, we have the power to gather them nang hindi namamalayan ng iba. Diba? News can be read online. As you can see, books now can be accessed online for free or with a fee. And research journals can be retrieved online with relative ease. Unlike dati, if you will try to take a look, dati kasi 'di ba, the way on how you gather information is that you need to go to the library first, tapos magbabasa ka talaga isa-isa. Nowadays, everything is online. Diba? Everything is online, lahat napakadali pong i-gather. And that is actually the power of being in a democratic country. So, as of the moment, we have all the power to access the information na kailangan natin. We have the power to voice out those information na na-gather natin, and so on. So, imagine nyo na lang kung naabutan nyo yung martial law before, you are not allowed to expose or to gather information kasi either makukulong ka or you will be shot dead nung dati. So be very careful. Ayaw natin siguro ulit mangyari yon kasi it's our freedom of speech nowadays. Okay? So, another example for communication naman, ito, video conferencing, usong-uso na ngayon, di ba? Zoom, Google Meet, tapos meron na rin tayong mga cellular networks, kagaya niyan, where we can send text and call people and use of mobile data for browsing. I don't know if you can still remember, pero like 10 years ago, napakahirap makipag-communicate sa mga kakilala natin online because ang mahal ng internet fee. Unlike ngayon, we can already communicate to anyone around the world na kahit di natin kilala, yan. For example, Omegle, di ba? We can communicate to them. Tapos, sa Pilipinas lang din ako nakakita na ginagawang dating site ang mga gaming mga gaming, mga gaming, lahat ng gaming. So for example, sa ML, sa COD, di ba? Ginagawa rin nilang way of communicating and flirting to other people out there. Ewan ko ba, Pilipino eh. Di ba? So, those are an example of communication naman. Next, let's proceed with the technologies. What are the examples and uses of ICT in terms of technologies? Obviously, we have the following: computers and radio access. Hindi na yata masyado ginagamit to kasi we have Spotify. Diba? We have Spotify. May phone na rin tayo eh. We have smartphones, we have satellite systems, televisions. Hindi na basta television ngayon kung napansin nyo. It's all about having a smart TV. Ano ibig sabihin ng smart TV? We can now browse the internet in our television, which is dati napaka-imposible. Parang masasabi mo pang mayaman lang siya dati, di ba? Pero ngayon, karamihan na rin sa household natin, naka-smart TV na. Kasi nga, you can browse YouTube, you can even watch Netflix directly to your smart TV, basta connected ka lang sa Wi-Fi and everything. Diba? So those are the different examples and uses of ICT. And meron pa. For information, we also have e-learning. Ito, for sure, nagagawa nyo rin to. Yan, Google Classroom, Edmodo, and Schoology. And for communications, we have online record system, like ito sa Canvas natin, where all of your information and results or can be accessed dito sa online record system natin. Ito Canvas, sobrang high-tech. Kasi the reason why I have chosen this big blue button is sabi ko nga, it's more high-tech than Google Classroom because I can already monitor what's happening and in real time. And at the same time, and madali kong mag-check ng attendance pag dito. Okay? So for the technology, we have softwares. So every software has a different set of purposes. Like for example, AutoCAD, computer-aided design. It's being used by architects to create and manage their blueprints, di ba? Audacity, where pwede kang maka-create ng music production software. Yan. So those are some examples. Atong Audacity, kung gusto nyong makagawa ng mga cover like yun, yung lamok-lamok-lamok, yan, pwede nyong gamitin ng Audacity para makagawa kayo ng music. Yan. There are a lot of softwares out there na available dito para makagawa. And marami pa. Photoshop, yan, for people who would like to edit and manipulate photos. Adobe Premiere, Adobe After Effects, kung gusto nyo mag-edit ng videos, add some effects, and so on. So, ang dami. Napaka-advanced na ng generation natin ngayon kasi pansin nyo, karamihan nasa fingertips na natin. We can already create something out from nothing by just using our phones nowadays. So that's the power of ICT as of the moment. Imagine nyo pa siguro kapag tatagal. Diba? So, any questions so far before we proceed? Man. And so, I think wala namang question. So, kung may question po, feel free to send a message or, unmute and ask questions and so on. Now, let's try to review the short history of ICT in the Philippines. Ito para gusto ko kasing maging aware tayo. Paano nga ba nag-start ang ICT sa Pilipinas? Yan. So, before 1928, before ICT in the Philippines, yan, telecommunications in the Philippines was segmented. You could only call people within your own small city. So, sino ang president natin noong 1928? Ayan. Dapat alam niyo yan, di ba? So, during the 1928, ayan, American-owned PLDT, which is the Philippine Long Distance Telecommunication, was incorporated. So, 1928 pa pala, may PLDT na. Pero American-owned pa lang siya and given the franchise to establish and operate telephone services in the Philippines. So, nag-umpisa ang PLDT as a telephone service. Wala pang internet noon eh. Diba? So, small phone companies in the provinces were acquired to speed up the rollout process. So, this time, you can already call, some other Filipinos all around the Philippines. Kasi, na-establish na nung time na to, nung 1928. So, 40 years after 1928 and 1968, this is actually the time where Filipinos can now connect to the entire world because PLDT became a Filipino controlled corporation, and take note, it was bought by Ramon Cojuangco 1968. But then, kung nagtataka kayo, wala pa pong internet dito nung time na to. Okay, 1968 pa lang yan. Pero at least, Philippine controlled na siya. Diba? So, 1987, cellular telephone network. This is actually the time where PLDT establishes the country's first cellular telephone network. Ano ibig sabihin ng first cellular telephone network? Meaning, yan, nag-uumpisa na magkaroon ng text message, yan, nung mga time na to. Kumbaga, beeper, dati, kung I don't know if you can still remember that, pero ito yun yung kausuhan ng beeper where you can send message, yan, through cellular. Kumbaga, wireless to dati. And like dati, yan, more on telephone lang. Makikipag-usap ka. Ngayon, you can, during 1987, you can talk or you can send a message to other people out there. So, 1987, yan, PLDT establishes the country's first cellular telephone network as well. Uy, naulit. Naulit lang. Anyways, 1994, ito, 1994, dito po nagkaroon ng pinakaunang internet connection. So, Benji Tan, who was working for Comnet, established Philippines' first connection to the internet at a PLDT network center in Makati City. And nung time na to kasi, it was a very big deal kasi ang ginawa lang talaga dati, nakapag-send lang sila ng message to one computer and another computer wirelessly. Kumbaga parang cellular phone, pero this time they are connected to the internet, tinatawag. And during this time, ang speed lang ng internet connection nila is around bytes per second. Kumbaga, ngayon kasi Mbps, di ba? So we have an internet connection of 20 Mbps, 50 Mbps, and so on. Before, malaki or mabilis na ang 1 kilobyte per second. Di ba? So, noong 2013 naman, the massive growth of mobile networks, yan, dumadami na ang mga gumagamit ng mobile networks. Yan. It reached 102 million Filipino users na po ang gumagamit ng mobile networks. That was 2013. So, like around years from now on, years before sa situation natin ngayon. But 2014, on the other hand, the Philippines was considered as the fastest growing internet population in the last 5 years. Totoo kaya to? Kasi parang hindi natin ramdam minsan, no? Pero I don't know if you can hear some news na ang PLDT daw ang pinaka mabilis na provider sa Southeast Asia and so on. I doubt. I really doubt, So that was 2014. Tingnan nyo naman kasi 531% ang growth ng internet population natin. Kumusta ka naman ngayon na 2022? Now, we are indeed as one of the country na may pinakamaraming internet users sa buong mundo, Pilipinas. Kaya nga, mas marami ring alam mo yun, mas maraming internet users, mas maraming mga feeling lawyers, feeling doctors, and so on. Kasi nga, you know the situation in Facebook. I don't know kung familiar kayo or aware kayo, pero that's how reality works in the internet ng Pilipinas. So, 2017, yan, internet connection population penetration, 119 million mobile phone subscriptions. 2017 pa yan. Itong 2022, mas lalo. Uh, because of this pandemic, year 2020, mas dumami po ang internet users ng Pilipinas. Because, lahat po naka-quarantine, lahat stay at home. So, imagine the population or internet connection population natin ngayon. Mas marami. Actually, mga times 10 pa yan eh. Diba? So, that is a short history or a brief history of ICT in the Philippines. Now, let's take a look at this. The current state of ICT in the Philippines. Puro tayo history eh. Pero, may mga part din na at least positive pakinggan sa atin. Ito. So, Philippines was dubbed as the ICT Hub of Asia. Kung maniwala kayo sa hindi, that was like 2017. Yan. We were dubbed as ICT Hub of Asia because of any ICT related jobs. Kasama na po dyan ang business process outsourcing or call centers. Yan. Dahil sa call centers kasi, mas lalong aware ba kayo na pinakamarami pong, aside sa India, Philippines po ang may isa sa pinakamaraming BPO industry sa Pilipinas. And, kumbaga, lagi nating inaano ang mga call centers, pero in reality, sila po talaga ang nag-aambag ng malaki in terms of the ICT state natin dito sa Pilipinas. Without them, hindi makikilala ang Philippines as ICT Hub of Asia. Ayan. So, mga business process outsourcing call centers. Because, sila yung nakikipag-usap sa buong mundo. Sila yung nakikipag-communicate, nakikipag-transaction, and everything. Ayan. Number 2, Philippines was also dubbed as the SMS text messaging capital of the world. Tingnan nyo yan. Text messaging capital of the world. Ewan ko lang kung inabutan nyo to, pero ito yung kausuhan dati ng mag-GM ka, isesend mo yung message mo sa maraming tao. Yan. Because of that, naturingan tayong ganoon. Kasi nga, we love sending message. We love sending group messages before the birth of messengers and, Facebook or any other social media out there. So obviously, napagdaanan siguro ninyo to na nagpapaload ka ng 10 piso, only text na yun, di ba? And so on. So the country has a capacity of 10 million phone lines and the volume of messages remains one of the highest in the world. And lastly, Philippines was also dubbed, obviously, as the selfie capital in the world. Hindi ako magtataka dito. Diba? So, selfie capital in the world. Tingnan nyo. Rank 16 ng Baguio. Our beloved Baguio City. Because, people... pero I can assume na kaya lang naman tayo naging rank 16. It's because of the tourists itself. Diba? Not the locals. Tayo kasing mga locals, we prefer to stay at home. And, hindi tayo masyado nagsa-selfie kasi nga taga dito na tayo sa Baguio eh. So, for the tourist, I think sila talaga yung maraming selfie dito sa Baguio. Diba? Well, nakaka-proud nga naman kasi. For example, pag pumunta ka dun sa Great Wall of Ongasan, ang ganda bang picture dun. Diba? Mapapaselfie ka nga naman talaga. Yan. Makati and Pasig, rank 1. Well, alalaki kasi ng building dyan eh. Cebu, rank 9. Iloilo, rank 72. And that was like based from Times Magazine 2010. Diba? So that's the current ICT state of the Philippines. Now, the development of ICT in the Philippines throughout the years, we have the following. We have like 5 different development or plans because they are planning to turn this country into number 1, an e-enabled society. Ano ibig sabihin ng e-enabled society? Citizens have access to technologies. So lahat na po tayo, they are planning na marunong nang gumamit ng phone, ng technology, which is nag-uumpisa na, di ba? Because of this pandemic, napilitan po ang karamihan nagpakabit ng internet connection mag-transact online, yan, and everything, di ba? Yan, quality education, efficient government service, greater source of livelihood, and a better way of life. So, i-improve pa nila. They are planning to improve the internet connection ng Pilipinas. Paano nila gagawin yon? By defeating the two major ISP or internet service providers here in the Philippines. So, gusto nilang talunin. Gusto kasi nilang magpasok ng iba pang mga ISP dito aside sa PLDT and Globes. Well, in fact, nag-umpisa na, di ba? May Converge na, may dito, and ewan ko, nakalimutan ko yung pangalan ng iba eh. So, yun. E-enabled society. Number two, ICT access in the Philippines. Yan, more advanced. Mobile cellular phones. Yan, the number of cellular phone is higher than the number of users. So, ano ibig sabihin nito? Uh, sa 10 katao daw po, siyam ang merong ang may dalawang cellphone. Siyam or walo, 8 to 9 people ang may dalawang phone or dalawang gadget, which is totoo. Diba? And also, and they are planning to fix telephones and internet connection, kagaya ng sabi ko kanina. Last 2014, Philippines was ranked 4th out of 10 with the highest internet users, yan, despite having a slow internet connection, which is totoo, 2014 pa yan. And the average internet speed of the Philippines before was 3.2 Mbps lang. The second, take note, the second slowest in Asia Pacific. So the average internet speed of 19.51 Mbps is far below the global average of 57.91, which is ito, average lang ng global to ha. Kumusta ka sa Japan? Ang Japan, nasa, ano na sila eh, gigabytes per second ang internet speed nila. Well, in fact, Japan is, or has the fastest internet speed all around the world. And the country's average mobile internet download speed of 15.06 is far below to the average of 26.12 Mbps. So, if you would like, sabi ko nga, pwede nyo makita yung internet speed ninyo para maging aware tayo kung ilan nga ba ang internet speed na meron tayo. So, in my case, yan. So, I've got like 120 Mbps. So, in your end, magkakaiba tayo. Masasabi ko nag-improve na to. Kasi dati, big deal na ang 1 Mbps eh. Diba? So, at least naging